At my wedding, my husband's family mocked my mother in front of 180 people. My mother-in-law pointed a manicured finger at the woman who raised me and said into the microphone, "That is not a mother. That is a mistake in a dress." My fiancé Desmond laughed. The guests laughed. I did not. I stood up, walked to the stage, and canceled the wedding right then and there. But I didn't stop at canceling the wedding. I realized that if they wanted to judge us by our bank accounts, I should play by their rules. The next morning, their world collapsed because they had no idea who I really was. Before I continue this story of absolute revenge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video to find out how one signature from me left my arrogant in-laws homeless. My name is Amara, and at 32 years old, I had spent the last 2 years playing a role. To the Vance family, I was just a simple administrative assistant at a mid-level firm, a lucky girl from the wrong side of the tracks who managed to snag their golden boy Desmond. They thought they were the royalty of Atlanta's black elite, a family built on old money and prestige. What they didn't know, and what I never felt the need to broadcast, was that I was actually the chief financial officer of Apex Holdings, one of the most aggressive debt acquisition firms in the country. I kept my career quiet because I wanted to be loved for me, not my portfolio. But standing in the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel that Saturday evening, I realized that silence had been a terrible mistake. The venue was suffocatingly expensive. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears, casting a golden light on the flower arrangements that cost more than my mother's car. The air smelled of expensive perfume and judgment. I stood in my white Vera Wang gown, a dress I had paid for myself, watching the guests arrive. These were the movers and shakers of Atlanta politicians, doctors, and the social climbers that Genevieve, my mother-in-law, called friends. I felt a hand snake around my waist. It was Desmond, looking dashing in his tuxedo, flashing that winning smile that used to make my knees weak. "You look beautiful, babe," he whispered, kissing my cheek. "Try to relax. Mother went all out for this. Don't let her see you looking so tense." I forced a smile, but my stomach was in knots. I had been asking to see the seating chart for a week, and Genevieve had constantly dodged me, saying she was handling the logistics. Now, looking at the gilded frame by the entrance, I understood why. My eyes scanned the list of tables. Table 1 was the head table reserved for the Vance family parents and siblings. Table 2 through 10 were for their VIP guests. I kept looking for Viola, my mother. I finally found her name. Viola Davis. Table 19. My blood ran cold. I walked over to the diagram to confirm the location. Table 19 wasn't just in the back. It was tucked into the far corner, directly next to the swinging double doors of the service kitchen and the hallway leading to the restrooms. It was the worst seat in the house, a spot usually reserved for the photographer's assistant or the DJ's equipment. "Desmond," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Why is my mother at table 19? Desmond didn't even look at the chart. He just shrugged, adjusting his cufflinks. "Oh, that. Mom thought it would be best. You know your mother, Amara. She is a simple woman. She gets overwhelmed easily. Mom didn't want her to feel uncomfortable sitting with the senator or the bank owners. She thought your mom would be happier where it is quieter." "Quieter," I repeated, staring at him. "It is next to the kitchen, Desmond. Waiters will be bumping into her chair all night. She is the mother of the bride. She belongs at table 1 with us." Desmond sighed, that condescending exhale he did whenever I challenged his family. "Babe, drop it. The chart is printed. We can't move people around now. Besides, look at her." He gestured toward the corner. My mother Viola was already sitting there. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress she had bought from Macy's. It was elegant and modest, but compared to the sequins and designer labels filling the room, she looked plain. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, smiling politely at a busboy who was refilling her water glass. She looked small, she looked isolated, and she looked incredibly dignified despite the disrespect. She doesn't know which fork to use for the salad, Amara Desmond whispered, leaning in close so no one else could hear. Mom is saving her from embarrassment. Just let it go. For me, today is about us. I looked at the man I was about to marry. For the first time, I didn't see the charming marketing executive. I saw a coward. I saw a man who would let his mother banish mine to the shadows just to keep up appearances. I wanted to scream, but the music swelled and the reception began. I swallowed my anger, telling myself I would fix this later. I would make it up to Mom. I walked to the head table, sat next to Desmond, and spent the next hour enduring the fake smiles of his family. Then came the toasts. Genevieve, my mother-in-law, sat like a queen at the center of the table, dripping in diamonds. But it was Ashley, Desmond's sister-in-law, who stood up first. Ashley was white, a former pageant queen married to Desmond's younger brother. She had spent the last 3 years trying to prove she was more Vance than the Vances, compensating for her outsider status by being the most vicious gatekeeper of their social circle. She tapped her champagne flute with a silver spoon. The room went silent. "Good evening, everyone," Ashley cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She launched into a 5-minute speech about how wonderful the Vance family was, how lucky Amara was to be joining such a prestigious lineage. She didn't mention me by name, just referred to me as Desmond's new project. Then she turned her gaze toward the back of the room. "And we must acknowledge the guests who traveled so far to be here," Ashley said, her smile turning predatory. "Like Mrs. Viola. Where are you?" "Oh, there you are. Way back there." She pointed. Every head in the room turned to look at table 19. My mother froze, holding her fork halfway to her mouth. A spotlight, which I had not authorized, suddenly swung across the room and illuminated my mother, blinding her. "We just want to thank you," Ashley continued, her voice echoing through the surround sound speakers. "We know this world is quite an adjustment for you. Genevieve and I were just saying how brave you are to wear that. It is so quaint. It really reminds us all to stay humble and remember where we came from, even if some of us have moved much further up than others." A ripple of laughter went through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. It was the laughter of the elite mocking the poor. My mother lowered her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. "That is enough," I said, standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. But Ashley wasn't done. She looked at Genevieve for approval. Genevieve stood up, taking the microphone from Ashley. The matriarch of the Vance family looked directly at me, then at my mother. The room went deadly silent, waiting for her benediction. "Sit down," Amara Genevieve commanded. "We are just having fun. Ashley is right. We have to be honest. Look at her." Genevieve pointed a long, diamond-encrusted finger at my mother, who was now wiping a tear from her cheek. "You can put a servant in a palace. But she is still a servant," Genevieve said, her voice projecting clear and cold. "We welcomed you, Amara, because Desmond insisted, but let's be clear about the stock you come from. That woman sitting by the bathroom? That is not a mother. That is a mistaken address." The room exploded with laughter. It was a roar of cruelty. I looked down at Desmond. I waited for him to stand. I waited for him to defend the woman who had paid for my college tuition by scrubbing floors. I waited for him to be a man. Desmond covered his mouth with his napkin to hide it, but I saw his shoulders shaking. He was chuckling. He was laughing along with them. He looked up at me, eyes watering from mirth, and tugged on my hand. "Sit down, babe," he wheezed. "It was a pretty good line. Don't be so sensitive." Time stopped. The sound of the room faded into a dull roar. I looked at Desmond's hand on my wrist, the expensive watch I had bought him for his birthday gleaming under the lights. I looked at Genevieve, smug and triumphant. I looked at Ashley, smirking behind her champagne glass. And then I looked at my mother, the strongest woman I knew, being reduced to a punchline by people who were drowning in debt they tried desperately to hide. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a break, it was a realignment. The administrative assistant died in that chair. The CFO took over. I pulled my hand away from Desmond's grip. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply walked around the table, my white dress flowing behind me like a shroud. I walked up the stairs to the small stage where the band was set up. I took the microphone from Genevieve's hand. She looked surprised, but she didn't let go immediately. I ripped it from her grip with a force that made her stumble back in her heels. The feedback from the speakers screeched, silencing the laughter instantly. I stood center stage looking out at the 180 faces of Atlanta's high society. I saw the confusion ripple through them. I looked down at Desmond, whose smile was fading into a frown of annoyance. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in 2 years, I spoke with my real voice. The voice that commanded boardrooms and terrified debtors. "Thank you, Genevieve, for that clarification," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "You are right. Mistakes were made today. But the biggest mistake wasn't my mother's dress. It was assuming that I was the one lucky to be here." I turned to look directly at Desmond. "Desmond," I continued, "you just laughed at my mother. You let your family humiliate her. You think you are sitting at the head table because you are special. But let me tell you something about mistakes. A mistake is thinking you can marry a woman, insult her blood, and expect her to pay the bill." I reached into the bodice of my wedding dress and pulled out my phone. "The wedding is off," I announced. "And since this is no longer a wedding reception, it is just a party that I am no longer hosting." Genevieve lunged forward, her face turning purple. "You ungrateful little brat, you will not ruin this day. You will sit down and apologize, or you will be nothing in this town." I looked at her, and then I looked at the banquet manager standing in the wings, looking terrified. "Manager," I called out, "bring me the bill. The full bill for this entire event. Right now!" The room gasped. Genevieve froze. Desmond stood up, looking pale. "Amara, what are you doing?" he hissed. "Stop this drama." "Oh, the drama hasn't even started," I replied, my eyes locking on his. "I am just balancing the books. And Desmond? You are about to be in the red." The silence in the St. Regis ballroom was heavy enough to crush bones. The laughter that had filled the room only seconds ago had evaporated, replaced by a tension so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the space. I stood center stage, the microphone heavy in my hand, looking down at the people who had spent the last 2 years making me feel small. They were not laughing anymore. Desmond was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, a piece of lobster tail still poised on his fork, looking like a fish gasping for air. Genevieve had turned a shade of pale that clashed horribly with her emerald necklace. I took a breath, letting the adrenaline settle into a cold, hard resolve. I looked out at the sea of faces, the senators, the bankers, the socialites who had just chuckled at my mother's expense. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a tremor, "I apologize for the interruption of your dinner. I know you were promised a show tonight. You were promised a wedding, a union of two families, a celebration of love. But as Genevieve so helpfully pointed out, mistakes were made. And the biggest mistake was assuming that I would marry into a family that mistakes cruelty for comedy." Desmond finally found his voice. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "Amara, get down from there right now. You are making a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." "No, Desmond," I corrected him. "I am saving myself. There will be no wedding. There will be no vows. This relationship is terminated effective immediately." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw guests reaching for their phones, eager to record the collapse of the social event of the season. And to the Vance family, I continued, turning my gaze to the head table. "You treated me like a charity case. You treated my mother like a prop for your amusement. You called this wedding a merger. Well, I have done my due diligence and I am pulling out of the deal. You are not a dynasty. You are a hollow circus, and I am tired of being the clown." That broke the dam. Genevieve let out a shriek that sounded more animal than human. She hiked up her designer gown and stormed up the stairs to the stage. She moved faster than I expected for a woman in 6-inch heels, her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "You ungrateful little gutter rat," she screamed, raising her hand high. She swung at me with everything she had. It was a slap meant to assert dominance, a slap meant to put the servant back in her place. But she forgot one thing. I was not the timid administrative assistant she thought she knew. I was a woman who had fought for every inch of ground I stood on. I caught her wrist in midair. The sound of my hand stopping hers was a sharp crack that echoed through the microphone I was still holding. I gripped her wrist tight, feeling the fragile bones beneath her aging skin. Her eyes widened in shock. She tried to pull away, but I held fast. "Do not," I whispered, leaning in, so only she in the front row could hear, "ever raise your hand to me again. I am not your daughter-in-law. I am not your subordinate. I am the stranger who knows exactly how much debt you are drowning in." I shoved her hand away and she stumbled back, catching herself on the podium. She looked at me with genuine fear for the first time. "You are crazy," she hissed. Get out! Get out of my sight!" "Gladly," I said. "But there is one small administrative detail we need to handle first." I motioned to the side of the stage. Mr. Henderson, the hotel's banquet manager, stepped into the light. He looked terrified, clutching a leather folio to his chest. He had been hovering there waiting for my signal. He knew what was coming. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice returning to professional detachment, "please explain to Mrs. Vance the current status of the bill for this evening." The poor man cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Yes. Well, per the contract, the total cost for the ballroom rental, the 5-course dinner for 180 guests, the open bar and the floral arrangements comes to $212,450. Genevieve straightened her dress, trying to regain her composure. "So what?" "Send the bill to the Vance Media Group offices. My husband will have his accountant handle it on Monday. We have credit here." "Actually, Mrs. Vance," Mr. Henderson said, his voice shaking, "we attempted to run the pre-authorization on the company card provided by your husband earlier today. It was declined. We tried again an hour ago. Declined. We cannot bill a company that has a credit hold." The room went deadly quiet. I watched Desmond's father, a man who usually sat in silence letting his wife run the show, bury his face in his hands. "That is ridiculous," Genevieve scoffed, though her voice wavered. "It is a banking error." Amara put down the deposit. "Just charge the rest to the card on file." I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf. "Ah, yes," I said. "The card on file. My card." I reached into my purse, which I had placed on the podium, and pulled out my wallet. I extracted the black metal card. The American Express Centurion. The heavy clink it made as I tapped it against the microphone was unmistakable. "You see, Genevieve," I said. "I was happy to front the cost when I thought I was joining a family. I thought we were partners. But since I am just a mistake in a dress, and since my mother is not worthy of eating the food I paid for, I think it is only fair that you cover your own expenses." I turned to Mr. Henderson. "I am revoking authorization for this card immediately," I stated clearly. "I am not paying for this event. As of this moment, the contract is voided due to breach of trust." Mr. Henderson nodded, turning to Genevieve. "Ma'am, without a valid form of payment, I am afraid we have a problem. Hotel policy dictates that for a bill of this size, if the primary payer withdraws, the party must be terminated immediately, and the police must be notified of theft of services unless payment is rendered now." "Police," Desmond choked out, finally stepping forward. "You cannot be serious. Amara, stop this. You are going to get my parents arrested. Over a joke." "Pay the bill." "Desmond," I said simply. "If you are as rich as you pretend to be, $200,000 should be pocket change. Pull out your wallet. Write a check. Save your family." Desmond looked at me, then at his mother, then at the floor. He didn't move. He couldn't move. I knew for a fact that his personal checking account had less than $5,000 in it. I knew because I had seen his bank statements when he left them on my kitchen counter. "That is what I thought," I said. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a thud that felt like a gavel banging in a courtroom. I walked down the stairs, past a trembling Genevieve, past a horrified Ashley, and straight toward the back of the room. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I didn't look at anyone. My eyes were fixed on one point. Table 19. My mother was standing up. She hadn't eaten a bite. She looked at me, her eyes wide, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked proud. "Let's go, Mom," I said, offering her my arm. "I know a place that serves better food than this, and they won't make you sit by the bathroom." Viola took my arm, holding her head high. As we walked toward the exit, the chaos erupted behind us. I heard Genevieve screaming at the manager. I heard Desmond shouting my name. I heard guests muttering and chairs scraping as people scrambled to leave before they got stuck with the tab. We pushed through the heavy double doors into the cool night air of the valet stand. The valet saw me coming and sprinted to get my car. As I waited, I heard a sound in the distance. It started low and grew louder, cutting through the humid Atlanta night. Sirens. Blue and red lights began to flicker against the glass facade of the St. Regis. The hotel manager hadn't been bluffing. He had called the police. My mother looked at me as the valet pulled up in my Mercedes. "Amara," she said softly. "What did you just do?" I opened the door for her and smiled a genuine smile this time. "I just balanced the ledger, Mom," I said. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw 3 police cruisers screeching to a halt in front of the hotel entrance. Officers were running inside. The world of the Vance family was beginning to burn, and I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I only felt the engine purring beneath me, driving us toward the truth. But they had no idea that the wedding bill was just the appetizer. Tomorrow I was going to serve the main course. The drive from the St. Regis Hotel to my real home was quiet. My mother sat in the passenger seat of my Mercedes S-Class, clutching her purse like a lifeline. She watched the city lights of Buckhead blur past her brow, furrowed in confusion. She knew I had a job. She knew I paid my bills. But she, like the Vance family, thought I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment near the airport. That was the address I used for mail. That was the address Desmond had picked me up from for our dates. It was a rental I kept solely to maintain the illusion of being a struggling middle-class administrative assistant. But tonight, the illusion was dead. I drove past the exit for the airport and merged onto the private access road for the Sovereign, the tallest and most exclusive residential tower in Atlanta. "Amara," my mother whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Where are we going?" "This is the Sovereign. Only movie stars and tech billionaires live here." I didn't answer immediately. I pulled up to the security gate. The cameras scanned my license plate, and the heavy iron gates swung open silently. The valet, who knew me as Ms. Hill, not Mrs. Vance, opened my door before the engine even stopped. "Welcome home, Ms. Hill," he said, ignoring my wedding dress with the professional discretion of someone used to seeing everything. I took my mother's hand and led her through the marble lobby to the private elevator. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The panel glowed green and the doors slid open. As we ascended to the 45th floor, I looked at my mother's reflection in the mirrored walls. She looked tired, small, and defeated. I hated Genevieve Vance for making her feel that way. The elevator opened directly into my living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire city. The lights of Atlanta stretched out like a sea of diamonds below us. The apartment was modern, stark, and expensive. A $10,000 Italian sofa sat on a Persian rug that cost more than Desmond's car. Modern art pieces that I had collected over 5 years of ruthless trading hung on the walls. My mother stepped out, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floors. She spun around slowly, her mouth agape. "Amara," she gasped. "How you told me you were an admin manager? You said you made $45,000 a year." I walked over to the wet bar and poured 2 glasses of aged scotch. My hands were steady now. The shaking from the adrenaline at the hotel had passed, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. "I lied, Mom," I said, handing her a glass. "I am an admin manager on my LinkedIn profile. But in reality, I am the Chief Financial Officer of Apex Holdings." My mother took the glass, staring at me as if I were a stranger. Apex Holdings, the investment firm. The vulture firm, I corrected her. We buy distressed debt. We buy companies that are failing, strip them down, and sell the parts. Or if they are lucky, we restructure them and own them forever. I am not just an employee, Mom. I own 15% of the firm. I took a long sip of the scotch, feeling the burn settle in my chest. I turned my back to the view and walked toward the double doors at the end of the hallway. Drink your drink, Mom. I have work to do. I pushed open the doors to my home office. This was my sanctuary. It looked nothing like a home. It looked like the bridge of a spaceship. 6 high-definition monitors were mounted in a semi-circle on a mahogany desk. A dedicated server rack hummed softly in the corner. This was where I made my money. This was where I hunted. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, the wedding dress bunching up around me. It felt ridiculous now, this heavy white gown. It was a costume for a play that had been canceled. I reached behind me and unzipped it. I let the expensive fabric pool around my waist, sitting there in my corset and silk slip. I didn't care. I felt lighter. I woke the computer system with a touch. The screens flared to life, bathing the dark room in a cool blue glow. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, typing in my secure credentials. Welcome, Director Hill. The system-synthesized voice greeted me. I didn't waste time. I opened the terminal for the credit bureau and the corporate registry. I typed in 3 words that made my heart hammer against my ribs. Vance Media Group. I had never looked them up before. Desmond had always been so vague about the family business, claiming private equity privacy, and I had respected that. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe that he loved me for me, and I loved him for him. I didn't want to know his finances because I didn't want him to know mine. But the truce was over. The screen populated with data. Charts, graphs, and lines of code cascaded down the center monitor. Red. Everything was red. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the balance sheet. I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh, Desmond," I whispered. "You are not rich. You are broke." The Vance family empire was a lie. The data showed a company in freefall. Their advertising revenue had dropped 40% in the last 2 years. Their operational costs were bloated by exorbitant salaries paid to family members. Desmond, Genevieve, his brother, even Ashley. They were bleeding cash. I scrolled down to their liabilities. They had maxed out every corporate line of credit. They had mortgaged the family estate. They had even taken out high-interest loans against their future receivables. And then I saw the reason for the wedding. There was a note in the file about a pending bridge loan from a conservative family trust in Savannah. The loan was for $5 million, just enough to keep them afloat for another year. The condition for the loan was stability. The trustees wanted to see Desmond, the heir apparent, settled down with a respectable wife to ensure the company's legacy. I wasn't a bride to them. I was collateral. They needed a wedding photo to secure a loan. But that wasn't the worst part. I brought up their debt maturity schedule. My eyes widened. They had a massive balloon payment of $15 million due. Date of maturity, tomorrow. Monday, May 12th. If they didn't pay $15 million by close of business tomorrow, they would default. They would lose everything. The company, the house, the cars, the reputation. I checked who held the debt. Originally, it was a consortium of regional banks. But banks get nervous when they see a sinking ship. They sell the bad debt to get it off their books. They sell it to risk takers. They sell it to sharks. I typed in a query to see who had purchased the Vance Media debt package last week. The system processed for a moment, the loading circle spinning. Current note. Holder, North Star Ventures, LLC. I froze. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. North Star Ventures was a shell company, a holding entity used for aggressive acquisitions. I opened a new window and logged into the Apex Holdings internal asset database. I searched for North Star Ventures, parent company Apex Holdings, portfolio manager Amara Hill. I sat back in my chair, the realization washing over me like a tidal wave of pure power. The laughter from the banquet hall seemed a million miles away now. Genevieve's slap, Ashley's sneer, Desmond's betrayal. It all shrank in the face of what was on the screen. My firm had bought their debt 3 days ago. The paperwork had crossed my desk for approval, but I had been so busy with wedding prep that I had just rubber-stamped it without looking at the name of the debtor. I owned them. I didn't just have their credit card bill, I held the mortgage on their entire existence. As the CFO of the parent company, I had the sole authority to call in the debt or grant an extension. I looked at the clock. It was midnight. In 9 hours, the markets would open. In 9 hours, Desmond would walk into a meeting expecting to charm a new investor. I picked up my phone and dialed my assistant Marcus. He answered on the first ring despite the late hour. Ms. Hill, is everything okay? I thought you were on your honeymoon. Change of plans. Marcus, I said, my voice crisp and commanding. I need you to prepare the boardroom for a hostile meeting at 9 sharp. And Marcus, print out the foreclosure notices for the Vance Media Group. Foreclosure. Marcus sounded confused. On a Monday morning? Yes, I said, looking at the red numbers on my screen that represented the destruction of my ex-fiancé's life. It is going to be a very busy week. I hung up the phone and looked at the reflection of the city in the window. My mother walked into the room holding the bottle of scotch. She looked at the screens, then at me. What is it, baby? She asked. Is it bad? I turned to her, my eyes gleaming with tears. I refused to shed, and a fire that would burn the Vances to the ground. No, Mom, I said softly. It isn't bad. It is perfect. The Vances owe $15 million to a company called North Star. And do you know who runs North Star? Mom shook her head. I do, I whispered. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city that was about to witness a massacre. Genevieve called you a mistake, Mom. Tomorrow I am going to show her that I am not a mistake. I am the consequences. I turned away from the window where the city lights of Atlanta sprawled out like a map of conquered territory. My heart was still racing from the discovery of the debt, but as I looked back at my mother, the adrenaline shifted into a different kind of shock. I expected to see Viola broken. I expected to see the woman who had sat quietly at table 19, head bowed, accepting the crumbs of respect the Vance family deigned to throw her way. I prepared myself to comfort her, to explain that her daughter was powerful enough to fix this. But the woman sitting on my Italian leather sofa was not the woman who had walked out of the St. Regis. Mom stood up, her posture, usually hunched in a way that suggested a lifetime of hard labor and humility, suddenly straightened. She looked at me, and the timidness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a steeliness that sent a shiver down my spine. She reached up to her head, and with a casual motion that made my jaw drop, she pulled off the gray, frizzy wig she had been wearing all evening. Underneath, her natural hair was braided in elegant silver-streaked cornrows that highlighted her high cheekbones. Next came the shoes. She kicked off the scuffed, sensible heels she had worn to the wedding, the ones Ashley had snickered at during the rehearsal dinner. She wiggled her toes into the plush carpet and let out a sigh of relief that sounded less like exhaustion and more like a warrior taking off armor after a battle. You know, Amara, she said, her voice dropping an octave. She no longer sounded like the simple countrywoman she played around Desmond. Her diction was crisp, authoritative, the voice of a woman who commanded rooms, not cleaned them. That Genevieve has a lot to say about taste for a woman whose entire net worth is tied up in leased cars and mortgaged property. I stared at her, my mouth slightly open. Mom, what are you doing? I asked. Why were you wearing that wig? Why did you let them talk to you like that? Viola walked over to the wet bar where I had left the bottle of scotch. She poured herself a glass neat and took a sip without wincing. She looked at the amber liquid, swirling it gently. I wanted to see who they really were, she said simply. You told me you were in love, Amara. You told me Desmond was a good man, from a good family. But I know that money masks a lot of rot. So I decided to play the part they expected. The poor, uneducated mother from the South Side. I wanted to see if they would welcome me with kindness, or if they would treat me like dirt on their shoe. She took another sip and turned to look at me, her eyes flashing. They failed the test, Amara. Spectacularly. I sat down on the arm of the chair, my mind reeling. I knew my mother was strong. She had raised me alone after my father died. But I had always assumed our struggles were purely financial. I thought the money for my college had come from loans and double shifts at the grocery store. Mom, I said, who are you? Really? Viola smiled a slow, dangerous smile that mirrored the one I had worn just minutes ago when I looked at the Vance debt portfolio. I am the owner of Viola's Greens, she said. The room went silent. I blinked. Viola's Greens wasn't just a farm. It was the largest organic produce distributor in the Southeast. They supplied every Michelin-starred restaurant in Atlanta, every high-end hotel, and every organic grocery chain from Savannah to Nashville. It was a logistics empire. You own Viola's Greens, I whispered. But that company is worth millions. Tens of millions, she corrected me calmly. I started it 20 years ago with the insurance money from your father's accident. I kept my name off the billboards because I value my privacy. I wanted you to grow up understanding the value of work, not the entitlement of wealth. That is why I let you work for everything you have, Amara. And look at you now. You are a CFO. You built your own throne. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city, her silhouette framed against the night sky. The Vance family prides themselves on the quality of their restaurants, she mused. They brag about their farm-to-table freshness. They charge $50 for a salad because they claim they source the best ingredients. She turned back to me, her expression cold. And do you know who their exclusive supplier is? I felt the air leave my lungs. No. Yes, she said. They buy everything from me. 70% of their menu relies on my supply chain. Their bridge loan, the one you saw in your file, is contingent on them maintaining their quality rating. Without my produce, their kitchens stop by Tuesday. Their reputation dies by Wednesday. She reached into her purse, not the battered one she had carried into the wedding, but a sleek phone case I hadn't noticed before, and pulled out a smartphone. It wasn't an old prepaid model. It was the latest iPhone. She tapped the screen, finding a contact saved as distribution manager. She put the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving mine. Richard, it is Viola, she said into the phone. Her voice was pure command. I am invoking the morality clause in our contract with the Vance Media Group and their restaurant subsidiaries. Yes, effective immediately. She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. I do not care about the penalty fees, Richard. I want every truck scheduled for delivery to their locations tomorrow morning rerouted to the food banks. Do not deliver a single head of lettuce. Do not deliver a single tomato. If they call, tell them the owner has decided that their business practices do not align with our values. Tell them the owner is a mistake in address. She hung up the phone and tossed it onto the sofa cushions. The sound was soft, but the impact was nuclear. She looked at me, and for the first time that night, I saw the mother I knew blend perfectly with the titan of industry standing before me. They mocked my clothes, Amara, she said softly. So I will strip them of their livelihood. They thought I was empty-handed. They did not know I was holding the keys to their pantry. I walked over and hugged her. It wasn't a hug of comfort anymore. It was a hug of partnership. We were two lionesses standing on top of the world, watching the hyenas below unknowingly wait for their doom. I am sorry I didn't tell you sooner, she whispered into my hair. But I needed to know you could stand on your own 2 feet. Tonight, when you took that microphone, I have never been prouder. You didn't need my money to destroy them. You used your own brain. We stood there for a moment, basking in the shared power of our secrets, but the silence was broken by the vibration of my phone on the coffee table. I pulled away and picked it up. The screen lit up with the message, The name at the top made my stomach turn. Desmond. I unlocked the phone and read the text aloud, my voice dripping with disbelief. Amara, you are insane. My mother is having a panic attack. You ruined the most important night of our lives over a misunderstanding. You need to come back to the hotel right now, pay the bill, and apologize to everyone. If you don't fix this tonight, my father is going to sue you for defamation and breach of contract. Don't test me. This is your last chance to be a Vance. I looked at the message, then at my mother. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was threatening me with a lawsuit when he couldn't even afford the data plan to send the text. He was offering me a chance to be a Vance when being a Vance was about to become a liability. Viola laughed a dry, humorless sound. He thinks he has leverage, she said. I typed a response, my fingers flying across the screen. I didn't send a paragraph. I didn't send an apology. I sent a single emoji, the waving hand. I looked at my mother. Get some sleep, Mom, I said. We have a big meeting in the morning. She raised an eyebrow. I smiled. Yes. I think the CFO of Apex Holdings needs to introduce the new majority shareholder to the board. If you are going to cut off their food supply, you might as well be in the room to watch them starve. As I turned off the lights in the living room, leaving only the glow of the city, I knew that the real wedding gift wasn't a blender or a toaster. It was this, the absolute synchronized destruction of a family that thought they were untouchable. Desmond wanted a wife who would stand by his side, while he was about to get a partner who would stand on his neck, and the best part was he was going to walk into my office tomorrow morning thinking he was the one in charge. Sunday morning broke over Atlanta with a deceptive calm. From the 45th floor of the Sovereign, the city looked peaceful, bathed in a soft golden light that hid the chaos brewing in the digital world. I sat at my kitchen island, wrapped in a silk robe, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. My mother was still asleep in the guest suite, exhausted from the emotional marathon of the previous night. I enjoyed the silence, knowing it was about to be shattered. I picked up my personal phone, not the encrypted work device I used for Apex Holdings, but the one Desmond and his family had the number for. I expected missed calls or angry texts. Instead, I saw notifications from every social media platform I had ever signed up for. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, even LinkedIn. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of tags, millions of views. I unlocked the screen and opened TikTok. The first video on my For You page was familiar. Painfully familiar. It was a shaky recording clearly filmed by a guest at table 19, or perhaps a waiter who had seen enough entitlement to last a lifetime. The caption read simply, "The moment the Vances lost their minds." I pressed play. On the small screen, I watched Ashley holding the microphone, her face twisted in that sneering, superior smile. I heard her voice, tinny but distinct, mocking my mother's dress. I saw the spotlight hit Mom. And then I heard Genevieve. The audio was crisp. "That is not a mother. That is a mistake in a dress." The video cut to my reaction, me storming the stage, and ended right as I slapped the microphone out of Genevieve's hand. It had 12 million views. I scrolled to the comments. If the Vances thought their social status would protect them, they had severely underestimated the internet. The comment section was a war zone, and the Vances were the casualties. People were dissecting every frame. They identified Ashley immediately. The internet detectives had found her modeling portfolio, her defunct blog, and her husband's business profile within hours. The sentiment was unanimous and furious. The hashtag racist wedding was trending #1 in the United States. The outrage was focused specifically on Ashley. Commenters were pointing out the visceral cruelty of a young white woman publicly humiliating a black elder in a room full of the city's black elite. They were calling out the colonial mindset, the audacity, the sheer lack of home training. Brands that Ashley had partnered with as a micro-influencer were already being tagged with thousands of users demanding they drop her. One comment with 50,000 likes Red Ashley Vance really thought she could come into our house and disrespect a matriarch like that. Watch her world burn. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. I had not leaked the video. I did not have to. The Vances had performed their cruelty on a stage, forgetting that in the modern world, everyone is a broadcaster. They had handed the public the weapon to destroy them. But as I refreshed the feed, the narrative shifted. A notification popped up that the official Vance Media Group page was live. I tapped the notification. The screen filled with the interior of the Vance family living room. They had clearly staged the scene with the precision of a political crisis team. Genevieve was sitting on the beige sofa, wearing a modest cardigan that looked nothing like the flashy designer gear she usually flaunted. She held a tissue in her hand. Desmond sat next to her, looking solemn and heartbroken. Ashley was there too, red-eyed and clinging to her husband, looking like a frightened child rather than the predator she had been the night before. "Thank you all for tuning in." Desmond began, his voice trembling with an emotion I knew was fake. "We are devastated by the video circulating online. We want to tell our side of the story before the mob destroys a family legacy built on love and community." I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. This was going to be good. "The video you saw was taken out of context." Genevieve sobbed, dabbing at dry eyes. "Viola and I have a playful relationship. It was an inside joke. A bad joke, yes, but just banter between mothers. We love Amara. We welcomed her with open arms when she had nothing. Lies. Pure, unadulterated lies." Ashley spoke up next, her voice wavering. "I would never disrespect anyone based on race or class. I love this family. But what the video does not show is what Amara did to us. She has been planning this for months. She is a con artist." I raised an eyebrow. "A con artist?" That was a bold angle. "She lied to my brother." Ashley continued, gaining confidence as she spun the web. "She told him she was a poor admin assistant. She made him pay for everything for 2 years. She used us for our status, for our connections. And when we found out she was actually hiding money, hiding a secret life, she staged this blow-up to avoid signing the prenuptial agreement. She is a gold digger who got caught, and now she is trying to destroy us to cover her tracks." Desmond looked into the camera, his eyes pleading. "Amara, if you are watching this, please. We forgive you. Just come back. Stop this smear campaign. We know you hired people to film that. We know you want to ruin us because we asked for a prenup. But we are a family. We can work this out." The live stream exploded with hearts and supportive comments from their remaining loyalist people who were too blind to see the manipulation. They were painting themselves as the victims of an unstable, greedy woman. They were using the oldest trick in the book. Darvo. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. They were banking on the fact that no one knew who I really was. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought that by labeling me a fraud, they could discredit anything I said in the future. I watched Desmond wipe a tear from his cheek, a tear that I knew was conjured up by the fear of poverty, not the pain of lost love. He looked pathetic. He looked like a man trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. They had just accused the chief financial officer of Apex Holdings of being a gold digger. They had accused the woman who owned their debt of being broke. I closed the app and set the phone down on the marble counter. The silence of the penthouse returned, but the energy had changed. Before, I was just going to foreclose on them. I was going to take their business and leave them to rebuild. But now they had attacked my character. They had dragged my name through the mud to save their own skins. They had tried to gaslight the world into believing that my mother deserved to be mocked. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was fully up now, illuminating the city that was waking up to the scandal. I finished my coffee in one long swallow. They wanted to play the media game. They wanted to talk about secrets and hidden lives. They wanted to talk about who was conning who. "Fine," I said to the empty room. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't need to post a video. I didn't need to cry on camera. I had something much more powerful than a live stream. I had the truth documented in ledger lines and bank transfers. I pulled up a folder labeled Desmond Private. Inside were screenshots I had collected over the last 6 months. Not financial records this time, but photos, texts, receipts from hotels that I had not stayed in. While I had been working late to acquire their debt, Desmond had been busy acquiring a mistress, and not just any mistress, the maid of honor. I looked at the folder, then at the foreclosure documents my assistant had prepared. "You want a crisis, Desmond," I whispered, dragging the files into an email addressed to the editor of the Atlanta Shade Room. "I will give you a catastrophe." The strategic silence I maintained was driving them insane. I could see it in the frantic way they refreshed their social media feeds, waiting for me to post a crying apology or a defensive rant. They wanted a public fight because in a screaming match they could drag me down to their level and beat me with experience. But I gave them nothing. No tweets, no status updates, no interviews. My silence was a vacuum, and they were suffocating in it. I sat in my home office, the cool air conditioning of the penthouse, a sharp contrast to the heat I was about to unleash. On my primary monitor, I had the draft email open. The subject line was simple: receipt regarding Desmond Vance. The recipient was the editor of the Atlanta Tea, the most vicious and widely read gossip blog in the city. I did not need to write a long story. The attachments spoke for themselves. I dragged and dropped the folder I had named The Betrayal. Inside were 27 screenshots and 5 photos. They were not vague. They were high definition. There was Desmond kissing a woman in a hotel elevator 3 weeks ago. There was a text thread where he mocked my financial status to her. And the kicker was the identity of the woman. It was not just a random stranger. It was Chantel, my maid of honor. The woman who had helped me pick out my dress. The woman who had stood next to me at the altar rehearsal, smiling while knowing she was sleeping with the groom. I clicked send. It took exactly 14 minutes for the internet to catch fire. I refreshed the blog's homepage. The headline screamed across the screen in bold red letters. Exclusive. Vance heir exposed. Cheating scandal rocks the racist wedding. The article did not just post the photos, it dissected them. It laid out the timeline, showing that while I was working overtime to pay for the wedding deposits, Desmond was using the company card to book suites at the W Hotel for Chantel. The public sentiment, which had already turned against the Vances because of the racism, now curdled into pure hatred. If there is one thing the internet hates more than a racist, it is a cheater who plays the victim. The comments on their earlier livestream video, the one where they called me a gold digger, turned vicious instantly. Users were reposting the screenshots of Desmond's texts, where he called me boring and cheap. They were tagging Chantel, who had frantically deleted her Instagram account 5 minutes ago, but screenshots live forever. I leaned back in my chair watching the carnage. This was the second strike. The first was their reputation. This second one was their character. And the third, which was happening simultaneously in boardrooms across the city, was their wallet. I opened a side monitor to view the stock ticker and news alerts for Vance Media Group partners. It was a bloodbath. The investors who had been on the fence, the ones Genevieve was desperately trying to woo with her fake apology video, were now running for the exits. No serious venture capital firm wants to be associated with a family that is trending for racism and infidelity in the same 24-hour cycle. I saw an alert from the bank that held their operating accounts. A freeze had been placed on their assets due to suspicious activity and potential breach of morality clauses in their lending agreements. I closed my eyes and imagined the scene inside the Vance mansion. It wasn't hard to picture. Genevieve would be pacing the Persian rugs she could no longer afford to clean, screaming at Desmond. She would be realizing that her plan to paint me as the villain had backfired because villains don't usually have proof that the hero is a lying adulterer. My phone buzzed. Phone. It wasn't a text this time. It was a notification from my security system. Motion detected at the front door. I frowned. The security at the Sovereign was impenetrable. No one could get to my penthouse floor without biometric clearance. Then I realized the alert wasn't coming from here, it was coming from the decoy apartment. The run-down two-bedroom unit in College Park that I still rented for $1,200 a month just to maintain my cover story. I had installed a Ring camera there months ago, mostly to check for package thefts, but today it was my window into Desmond's desperation. I pulled up the live feed on my iPad. There he was, Desmond Vance. He looked nothing like the polished prince from the wedding. His designer shirt was wrinkled and sweat-stained at the armpits. His hair was disheveled. He was pounding on the peeling green paint of the apartment door, looking over his shoulder, as if he expected paparazzi to jump out of the bushes. "Amara, open the door. I know you are in there." He kicked the bottom of the door. The sound was tinny and hollow through the camera's microphone. "Amara, please. You have to stop this. My dad is having chest pains. The investors are pulling out. Just come out and we can talk. I will give you whatever you want. I will sign the papers. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them the photos are fake." I watched him plead with a piece of wood. It was pathetic. He really thought I was inside sitting on a second-hand couch crying over him. He thought he could charm or bully me into submission one last time. He had no idea that I was 10 miles away, sitting on Italian leather, drinking imported sparkling water, and preparing to take his company from him legally and permanently. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number again. My phone on the desk lit up. I let it ring. On the screen, I saw a neighbor from the apartment complex open their door. It was Mrs. Higgins, an elderly woman who used to bake me cookies when I stopped by to check the mail. She stepped out in her housecoat, holding a broom. "Boy, get away from that door," Mrs. Higgins yelled. "Amara isn't home, and even if she was, she doesn't want to talk to a man who yells like a fool." Desmond spun around looking wild. "You don't understand. She is ruining my life. She has to be here. This is where she lives." Mrs. Higgins laughed, a sound that crackled through the speaker. "She lives here, honey. Amara hasn't slept here in 2 years. She just picks up her mail. You don't know much about your own woman, do you? Now get before I call the police." Desmond looked at the door one last time, defeated. He slumped against the railing of the walkway. I zoomed in on his face. The arrogance was gone. In its place was pure terror. He was realizing that he didn't know me at all. He didn't know where I lived. He didn't know my money. He didn't know my heart. And most importantly, he didn't know that while he was banging on a wooden door in College Park, I was in a glass tower in Buckhead, printing out the agenda for a meeting that would end his career. I tapped the microphone button on the app. I could speak through the doorbell camera. The temptation was strong. I wanted to tell him to go home and pack a box. I wanted to tell him that his mother's house was next on my list. But I stopped myself. No. That would be mercy. That would give him a warning. And I was done giving the Vance family warnings. I closed the app and turned off the iPad. Let him sweat in the humid Georgia heat. Let him drive back to his mother empty-handed. Let them spend one more night thinking they could spin this, thinking they could find a loophole. Because tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, they were walking into the lion's den. And unlike Daniel in the Bible, God was not going to shut the lion's mouth. I picked up the black folder on my desk. Inside were the acquisition papers for Vance Media Group. I ran my finger over the signature line where I would sign as the new owner. "Go home, Desmond," I whispered to the empty room. "Get a good night's sleep. You are going to need it, because tomorrow you are not negotiating with your fiancé. You are negotiating with the shark who just smelled blood in the water." I watched Desmond on the screen of my iPad, slumped against the peeling doorframe of the decoy apartment. He looked defeated, small, and desperate. But I knew better. I knew that beneath that pathetic exterior lay a reservoir of arrogance that was only temporarily drained. All he needed was a drop of hope, a single sign of weakness from me, and he would swell back up into the monster who had laughed at my mother. It was time to give him that hope. It was time to bait the trap. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. On the surveillance feed, I saw him scramble for his phone, nearly dropping it in his haste. He answered on the first ring, his voice breathless and frantic. Amara. Amara. Where are you? I am at your apartment. Your neighbor is crazy. Open the door right now. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of fear and insecurity I had felt in the early days of our relationship. I let my voice tremble, pitching it higher, breathless with fake anxiety. Desmond. I sobbed into the receiver. I am not there. I am driving. I saw the news. I saw the blogs. It is too much. I cannot take it anymore. My mother is crying. Everyone hates us. I just want it to stop. I watched his posture change instantly on the screen. He straightened up. He brushed the dirt off his sleeve. The desperation evaporated, replaced by the familiar sneer of control. He thought he had won. He thought I had broken. Stop crying, Amara, he snapped, his voice dropping into that condescending tone he used when he explained wine lists to me. You brought this on yourself. You acted like a child, and now you are paying the price. But because I am a good man, because I still care about you despite everything, I am willing to help you fix this. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. He was willing to help me. He was drowning, and he thought he was the lifeguard. Please, Desmond, I whined. I have the money. I have the savings I put aside for a house. It is exactly $200,000. I just want to pay the hotel and make the internet stop attacking me. Can we just meet? Can we just go back to how it was? Desmond laughed, a short, sharp bark of triumph. We can't go back, Amara. You humiliated my mother. But if you pay the debt and issue a public apology, maybe, just maybe, I can convince my parents not to sue you into oblivion. I am willing to give you that chance. He paused, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. He needed that money. He needed it to show his parents he was a fixer. But more than that, he needed to feel superior. He needed to drag me into his world and make me feel small one last time. Meet me tomorrow morning, he commanded. 9 o'clock sharp. Okay, I whispered. Where, the coffee shop on Main? No, he scoffed. I don't have time for coffee shops. I have big business to handle tomorrow. Real business. Meet me at the headquarters of Apex Holdings in Buckhead. I froze. My hand gripped the phone tighter. Apex Holdings. My building. My kingdom. Why Apex? I asked, my confusion genuine this time. Why would he choose the one place on earth where I was a god? Desmond's voice swelled with self-importance. Because, Amara, unlike you, I have a company to run. I have a meeting at Apex at 9:30 with a major investment firm called North Star Ventures. They are looking to acquire our debt and inject new capital. They recognize the value of the Vance brand, even if you don't. I am going to close a multi-million-dollar deal that will save my family's empire. I closed my eyes, savoring the delicious irony. He was meeting North Star. He was meeting me. He just didn't know it yet. He thought he was walking into a rescue mission. He had no idea he was walking into his own funeral. So meet me in the lobby at 9, he continued. Bring the cashier's check and dress appropriately, Amara. This is a billion-dollar office. Try not to look like your mother. The rage flared in my chest, hot and blinding, but I pushed it down. I converted it into fuel. Okay, Desmond, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I will be there. I will bring the money, and I will be dressed to kill. Good girl, he said. Don't be late. The line went dead. I looked at the iPad one last time. Desmond was walking away from the apartment door, a bounce in his step. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. He was dialing his mother, probably to tell her that he had brought the stray dog to heel. I set the phone down on the cold marble counter of my kitchen. The performance was over. The trembling victim was gone. I stood up and walked into my home office where the lights of the server rack blinked in the darkness. I pressed the intercom button on my desk phone. Marcus, I said. My assistant answered immediately. Yes, Ms. Hill is the schedule for tomorrow's set. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied. The representatives from the Vance Media Group are confirmed for 9:30 in the main boardroom. They believe they are meeting with a senior partner from North Star Ventures. Change the location. I said, my voice steady and cold. I don't want them in a meeting room. I want them in the executive boardroom. The glass one. The one with the view of the entire city. There was a pause. That room is usually reserved for the CEO, Ms. Hill. I know, I said. And make sure the blinds are open. I want the sun in their eyes. I want them to see everything. And Marcus, yes, Ms. Hill. Prepare the foreclosure documents. Have them printed on heavy bond paper and put them in a red folder. Red, ma'am. Yes, I said, looking at my reflection in the dark window. The reflection of a woman who was done hiding. Red for blood. Because tomorrow there is going to be a slaughter. I released the button and leaned back in my chair. Desmond wanted me to dress appropriately. He wanted me to fit in at a billion-dollar office. I smiled. I walked to my closet and pushed aside the modest cardigans and floral dresses I wore when I was playing the part of Amara the admin. I reached to the back where my real clothes lived. I pulled out a tailored Alexander McQueen suit in sharp electric blue. I pulled out my Louboutin heels, the ones with the spikes on the toes. I pulled out the diamond-encrusted watch that cost more than the Vance family's entire year of revenue. He wanted to show me what success looked like. He wanted to intimidate me with the grandeur of Apex Holdings. He was going to walk into my lobby stand on my marble floors and wait for me to arrive. He thought he was setting a trap. He thought he was luring a mouse with a piece of cheese. He didn't realize that the mouse was actually a viper, and he had just invited it into his bed. Sleep tight, Desmond, I whispered. Enjoy your victory lap. Because when you wake up, you are going to find out that the woman you called a mistake is the one holding the eraser. And I am about to wipe you out. Monday morning arrived in Atlanta with a humidity that stuck to the skin, a heavy blanket of heat that foreshadowed the storm about to break over the Vance family legacy. While I was in my penthouse adjusting the lapels of my electric blue Alexander McQueen suit, Genevieve Vance was waking up in her colonial mansion, convinced that she could still spin the narrative. She believed that Monday was a fresh start, a chance to use her connections and her charm to erase the disaster of the weekend. She had no idea that her world had already stopped turning. She just hadn't felt the gravity shift yet. The first domino fell at 6 in the morning at the flagship location of Vance Bistro in Midtown. It was their crown jewel, a restaurant that prided itself on farm-to-table Southern cuisine. The executive chef Marco unlocked the back door to receive the daily delivery of fresh produce. Usually, by 6:15, the alleyway would be bustling with drivers unloading crates of organic kale, heirloom tomatoes, and artisan vegetables. But today the alley was silent. There were no trucks. There were no crates. There was only the hum of the city waking up and the buzz of flies near the empty dumpster. Marco waited 10 minutes, then 20. By 6:45, panic began to set in. A restaurant without food is just a room with tables. He picked up his phone and dialed the distribution center for Viola's Greens. He expected to hear the dispatcher's voice. Instead, he heard a sharp mechanical tone followed by a recording. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this line." He frowned and tried the emergency backup number. Same result. Blocked. Marco didn't call Desmond. He called the person he feared most. Genevieve. Genevieve was sitting at her vanity applying layers of foundation to hide the dark circles under her eyes when her phone rang. She saw the chef's name and swiped right, annoyed. "Marco, why are you calling me this early? I have a very important meeting with investors today. Do not bother me with menu changes." Mrs. Vance Marco's voice was tight with stress. "There is no menu. The delivery didn't come. Viola's Greens ghosted us. The walk-in fridge is empty. We have 0 produce for the lunch rush. I have 60 reservations on the books for noon, and I cannot even make a side salad." Genevieve froze, her mascara wand hovering midair. "What do you mean they didn't come? We have a contract, an exclusive contract. Call them back and scream at them. Tell them who we are." "I did," Marco replied. They blocked our numbers. And Mrs. Vance. I called my contact at the other supplier, the one we use for dry goods. They said they received a memo this morning. All credit accounts for Vance Media Group subsidiaries are on hold pending a liquidity review. They are not sending the flour or the oil either. We are dead in the water. The phone slipped from Genevieve's hand and clattered onto the glass top of her vanity. Viola's Greens. The name echoed in her mind. For 20 years she had signed checks to that company, never once connecting the dots. She had mocked a woman named Viola to her face on Saturday night, calling her a mistake, and on Monday morning that mistake had just cut off the oxygen to her family's business. "It is a glitch," she whispered to herself, her hands shaking as she picked up the phone. "It has to be a computer error. I will fix this after the meeting. Once we get the check from North Star, I will buy a new supplier. I will buy a whole farm if I have to." But the chaos was not confined to the restaurant. Across town in the trendy district of Buckhead, Ashley Vance was trying to maintain her own illusion of normalcy. She had put on oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes and a wide-brimmed hat to obscure her face, hoping to avoid recognition after the viral humiliation of the weekend. She walked into her favorite coffee shop, needing a double shot of espresso to numb the headache that had been pounding since Saturday. She noticed the barista whispering to a coworker as she approached the counter. She saw the side-eye glances from the customers in line. They recognized her. She was the girl from the video. She was the racist sister-in-law. Ashley lifted her chin, channeling the arrogance she had learned from Genevieve. She ordered her oat milk latte with extra foam, tapping her acrylic nails on the counter impatiently. "That will be $7.50, the barista said, not making eye contact. Ashley pulled out her platinum credit card, the one linked to the family's corporate expense account. She tapped it against the reader with a flourish. The machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant sound. Transaction declined. Ashley frowned. "Try it again. The chip is sensitive." The barista sighed a sound of pure exhaustion and tapped it again. Declined. Contact issuer. The line behind Ashley began to murmur. Someone snickered. Ashley felt the heat rising in her cheeks. She dug into her purse and pulled out her personal debit card. This one was linked to the joint account she shared with her husband, Desmond's brother. Surely that was safe. She inserted the card. Declined. Insufficient funds. The barista looked at her, and this time there was a smirk playing on his lips. "Do you have cash, ma'am? Or maybe you want to call your mother-in-law to fix it?" The customer behind her laughed out loud. Ashley snatched her cards back, her hands trembling violently. She checked her banking app on her phone. The screen loaded, and her heart stopped. The balance was 0. Beside the number was a red notification. Account frozen by creditor order. She didn't wait for her coffee. She turned and ran out of the shop, the sound of laughter chasing her onto the street. She scrambled into her Range Rover and called Genevieve, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Genevieve," she gasped. "My cards. They are dead. They took the money. They took everything. I cannot even buy coffee." Genevieve was already in the car with Desmond, speeding toward the Apex Holdings tower. She put Ashley on speakerphone. "Stop crying, Ashley," Genevieve snapped, though her own heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It is Amara. It has to be. She is doing this to spook us. She probably reported the cards as stolen to mess with us. It is just a petty game." "But Mom," Desmond said from the driver's seat, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "The chef called me too. The restaurant is closed. We are losing $10,000 an hour. If the investors find out we are non-operational, the deal is off." Genevieve reached over and grabbed Desmond's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "Listen to me," she hissed. "The investors will not find out. We are going to walk into that meeting at Apex Holdings, and we are going to sign that deal with North Star Ventures. We are going to get $5 million in capital today. Do you hear me today?" She looked out the window at the passing skyline of Atlanta, the city she thought she owned. Amara thinks she can play hardball. Genevieve continued, her voice dripping with venom. She is just an admin assistant with a grudge and a hacker friend. She does not understand how high finance works. We are Vances. We are untouchable. Desmond pulled the car up to the valet stand of the Apex Tower. The building loomed over them, a monolith of glass and steel reflecting the morning sun. It looked impenetrable. It looked powerful. Genevieve checked her reflection in the visor mirror one last time. She applied a fresh coat of red lipstick, masking the fear with a painted smile. We go up there, we charm the North Star representative, and we save the company, she commanded. And once the ink is dry, once the money is in our account, I am going to destroy Amara. I will sue her for every penny she has. I will make sure she never works in this town again. She opened the car door and stepped onto the pavement, her heels clicking with purpose. Let's go get our money, Desmond. They walked into the lobby, heads held high, marching toward the elevator that would take them to the 45th floor. They believed they were ascending to their salvation. They had no idea they were walking straight into the slaughterhouse, and the butcher was already sharpening her knife. The lobby of the Apex Holdings Tower was designed to intimidate. It was a cathedral of glass and steel with ceilings that soared 3 stories high and floors made of imported Italian marble that echoed with the footsteps of the powerful. The air was kept at a crisp 68 degrees, a temperature that discouraged loitering and encouraged efficiency. I stood near the center of the room, positioned perfectly between the main entrance and the private executive elevators. I was not hiding today. I was not blending in. I was wearing the electric blue Alexander McQueen suit I had pulled from the back of my closet the night before. My hair was pulled back in a severe, sleek bun, and on my wrist the diamond watch Desmond had never seen caught the morning light. I checked the time. 9:29. Right on schedule. Through the revolving glass doors I saw them approach. The Vance family arrived not like a business delegation, but like a desperate army trying to maintain formation. Genevieve led the charge. She was wearing a Chanel suit that I knew was at least 5 years old, accessorized with a string of pearls intended to project old money stability. But up close I could see the cracks in the porcelain. Her makeup was applied a little too heavily, trying to cover the sleepless night caused by empty pantries and frozen bank accounts. Desmond walked half a step behind her, clutching a leather briefcase that I knew contained absolutely nothing of value. Ashley brought up the rear, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, nervously clutching her designer handbag as if she expected someone to snatch it. They pushed through the doors, bringing a gust of humid Atlanta air with them before the climate control swallowed it. They looked out of place. In a building filled with sharks in tailored suits, the Vances looked like decorative fish that had flopped out of their tank. Ashley was the first to spot me. She stopped dead in her tracks, her heels screeching slightly on the marble. She nudged Genevieve, pointing a manicured finger in my direction. "Oh my God," Ashley hissed, her voice carrying across the quiet lobby. "Look who decided to show up." Genevieve stopped and turned. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. For a fleeting second, I saw confusion. She didn't recognize the suit. She didn't recognize the posture. She was used to seeing Amara, the admin, the girl who wore sensible flats and polyester blends. But the cognitive dissonance was too much for her arrogance to process. She immediately defaulted to her standard narrative. "Well," Genevieve said loud enough for the reception staff to hear, "I see someone came to her senses." They walked toward me. I didn't move. I stood my ground, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, my expression unreadable. Desmond stepped forward, a smirk plastering itself onto his face. The fear I had seen on the Ring camera the night before was gone, replaced by the false confidence of a man who thinks he is about to sign a multi-million-dollar deal. "You are early, Amara," Desmond said, looking me up and down. "And you certainly dressed up. I told you to look appropriate, but I didn't think you would rent a costume. Who are you trying to be, a CEO?" Ashley laughed, a shrill grating sound. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. She is not trying to be a CEO. Desmond Ashley sneered. Look at her. She is standing by the reception desk. She is probably here to beg for a job. What is it, Amara? Are you applying for the janitorial staff? Or maybe you are hoping to be the coffee girl for the meeting we are about to have. I looked at Ashley. I looked at the dark circles under her eyes that the sunglasses couldn't hide. I am here for the meeting, Ashley, I said calmly. Genevieve scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Don't be ridiculous. This meeting is for serious investors only. It is with North Star Ventures. We are talking about millions of dollars, Amara. Not the pennies you are used to counting. Desmond checked his watch, ignoring me to address his mother. Mom, we have a few minutes before the partners come down to get us. I need to review the pitch one last time. He turned back to me, snapping his fingers near my face to get my attention. Amara, since you are here and you clearly want to be useful, go make yourself busy. Go over to the cafe corner and get my mother a glass of fresh orange juice. No pulp, and get me a double espresso. If you do it quickly and don't spill anything, maybe I will let you sit in the corner of the room and watch how real business is done. It might be educational for you. I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He was standing in my building about to meet with my company to beg for my money, and he was ordering me to fetch juice like a servant. I didn't move. Did you hear me? Desmond asked, his voice hardening. I said get the juice. If you want us to forgive you for the stunt you pulled at the wedding, you need to start showing some humility. Now move. The lobby was silent. The receptionists behind the desk were watching with wide eyes. They knew who I was. They were terrified to breathe. I looked Desmond dead in the eye. I am not getting you juice, Desmond. I said, my voice low and even. And I am not sitting in the corner. Genevieve stepped in her face, flushing with anger. Listen to me, you insolent little girl. We are the guests of honor here. We are about to save our company. You are nothing. You are a mistake in a dress. Remember? Now either get the juice or get out of our sight before I call security and have you thrown out. Security, I repeated. You want to call security? Yes, she hissed. I will have them drag you out by your hair. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. The sound of the private executive elevator chiming interrupted us. It was a distinct tone, deeper and richer than the public elevators. The heavy brass doors slid open smoothly. The Vances turned to look, expecting I assumed their savior from North Star Ventures. Out stepped Marcus, my executive assistant. He was an impeccably dressed man in his 50s who had served 3 CEOs before me. He carried a leather folio and radiated an aura of absolute authority. Desmond straightened his tie. Ah, this must be the partner. Everyone look sharp. Desmond extended his hand, stepping forward to greet Marcus. Good morning, Sir, Desmond said, putting on his best salesman voice. I am Desmond Vance. This is my mother, Genevieve. We are ready for our meeting with North Star. Marcus didn't take Desmond's hand. He didn't even look at him. He walked straight past Desmond as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked straight past Genevieve, who had put on her charming smile. He walked straight past Ashley, who was trying to look bored. Marcus stopped directly in front of me. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect. Good morning, Ms. Hill. Marcus said, his voice clear and deferential. The board of directors is assembled in the glass conference room as you requested. The foreclosure documents are prepared and ready for your signature. The silence that followed was absolute. Desmond's hand was still extended in the air, grasping at nothing. Genevieve's smile froze, twitching at the corners. Ashley's mouth fell open behind her sunglasses. I looked at Marcus. Thank you, Marcus. Are the guests cleared for security? Yes, Ms. Hill, Marcus replied. I have issued them temporary visitor passes, restricted access only. I nodded. I turned back to the Vances. They were statues. They were looking from Marcus to me, and back again, their brains struggling to compute the data. Ms. Hill, Board of Directors, foreclosure. I took a step toward the elevator, then stopped and looked back at Desmond. You wanted to see how real business is done, Desmond, I asked. I gestured toward the open elevator doors. Well, come on then. The CEO hates to be kept waiting. I turned and walked into the elevator. Marcus followed, pressing the button for the penthouse floor. I watched through the narrowing gap of the closing doors as the realization began to dawn on their faces. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was horror. They weren't just visiting Apex Holdings. They were realizing that the monster they had been running from was the one holding the door open. Are you coming? I asked softly. Desmond stumbled forward, pulling his mother and sister with him, entering the metal box just before the doors snapped shut, sealing their fate. The elevator ride up to the penthouse floor was a study in suffocating silence. I stood at the front, my back to the Vance family, watching the floor numbers climb on the digital display. Behind me, I could hear the shallow, rapid breathing of 3 people who were slowly realizing that the ground beneath their feet was turning into quicksand. Desmond shifted his weight from foot to foot, the rustle of his suit jacket betraying his nerves. Genevieve was humming a low, tuneless melody, a nervous tick I had never noticed before. Ashley was tapping her acrylic nails against the screen of her phone, frantically trying to find a signal that didn't exist in the reinforced steel box of the executive lift. When the doors slid open, we were not greeted by a receptionist or a waiting area. We stepped directly into the executive boardroom. It was a space designed to remind everyone who entered of their insignificance. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a 360-degree view of the Atlanta skyline. The morning sun flooded the room, bouncing off the polished mahogany table that stretched 20 feet down the center. At the far end, a single high-backed black leather chair sat empty, framed by the view of the city like a throne. Marcus walked in first, placing the thick red folder at the head of the table. He then stepped back and stood by the wall, hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of professional indifference. I walked into the room, the click of my Louboutin heels echoing on the hardwood floor. I didn't stop at the guest chairs. I didn't stop at the side of the table where junior partners usually sat. I walked straight to the head of the table. I placed my clutch next to the red folder. I pulled out the high-backed leather chair and sat down. I crossed my legs, leaned back, and rested my hands on the armrests. I looked down the long expanse of mahogany at the Vance family, who were huddled near the elevator doors like frightened sheep. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the 3 chairs positioned at the far end of the table. The distance between us was deliberate. It was a chasm of power. Genevieve's face turned a violent shade of red. The shock of the lobby had worn off, replaced by a surge of indignation. She marched toward me, her finger raised. "Amara, have you lost your mind?" she screamed, her voice bouncing off the glass walls. "Get out of that chair immediately. That is for the managing partner of North Star Ventures. You are going to get us thrown out before the meeting even starts." Desmond rushed forward, trying to grab his mother's arm, but his eyes were fixed on me with a mixture of confusion and horror. "Amara, seriously," he hissed. "This isn't funny. Get up. You are the ex-fiancé. You don't sit there. You sit in the corner or you wait in the lobby. If the investors walk in and see you playing boss, they will laugh us out of the building." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply watched them unravel. Ashley hung back, whispering loudly to Desmond. "Is she on drugs? Why does she think she can sit there?" Genevieve reached the head of the table. She slammed her hand down on the wood, inches from my hand. I said, "Move!" she shrieked. "You are an administrative assistant. You are a nobody. Do you hear me? You are a mistake." Marcus cleared his throat. The sound was soft, but in the acoustic perfection of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. "Mrs. Vance," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a register of icy command. "I must insist that you lower your voice. You are addressing the Chief Financial Officer of Apex Holdings and the majority shareholder of the North Star Distressed Asset Fund." Genevieve froze. Her hand was still on the table, but the strength went out of her arm. She looked at Marcus, then slowly turned her head to look at me. What did you say? She whispered. I said. Marcus continued, stepping forward to hand a business card to Desmond, who took it with trembling fingers. That Ms. Amara Hill is the CFO. She is the executive who approved the acquisition of your debt portfolio this morning. She is not the admin. She is the bank. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and suffocating. I watched Desmond look at the business card. I watched his eyes scan the embossed title. I watched his knees buckle slightly, forcing him to grip the back of a chair for support. No. Desmond stammered. That is impossible. I have seen her pay stubs. I have seen her apartment. She makes $45,000 a year. She drives a Honda. I rented the Honda, Desmond. I said, speaking for the first time since I sat down. And the pay stubs Photoshop is a wonderful tool. I wanted to see if you loved me or if you were just looking for a wife to secure your loan. I got my answer on Saturday night. I reached out and opened the red folder. I pulled out a stack of documents, the paper crisp and heavy. Let's skip the pleasantries. I said, my voice hardening into the tone I used to negotiate hostile takeovers. You came here today expecting a meeting with North Star Ventures to secure a $5 million bridge loan. You were hoping to use that money to pay off your balloon note that matures today at 5 p.m. Genevieve stumbled back, falling into one of the guest chairs. She looked as if she was having a stroke. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. However, I continued flipping a page. North Star Ventures is a subsidiary of Apex, and as of 9 a.m. this morning, I personally executed the buy order for your debt from the regional banks. I own your mortgage. I own your equipment leases. I own the trademark to the Vance Media name. I looked at Desmond. He was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. So, Desmond, I said, I am not here to give you a loan. I am here to collect. You owe me $15 million. Do you have it? Desmond swallowed hard. Amara, please. You can't do this. We are family, or we were going to be. You can't just destroy us because of a bad wedding toast. We can work this out. I can explain the Chantel thing. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. The Chantel thing is irrelevant to this meeting, Desmond. That is a personal moral failure. This is business. And in business, when you cannot pay your debts, the creditor has the right to seize assets. I picked up the document on top of the pile and slid it down the long mahogany table. It spun across the polished surface and came to a stop right in front of Genevieve. This is a notice of default and immediate foreclosure, I said. You have breached the morality clause of your lending agreement by engaging in public hate speech. You have breached the liquidity clause by having your accounts frozen. And you have breached the solvency clause by losing your primary supplier. Genevieve picked up the paper, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. Foreclosure, she gasped. On the business. On everything. I corrected her. The business, the warehouse, and the mansion. You put the house up as collateral 3 years ago, Genevieve. Did you think I wouldn't find that in the title search? Ashley, who had been silent until now, suddenly stepped forward. She looked terrified, but also strangely defiant. Well, this doesn't affect me, she said, her voice wavering. I am just an in-law. My name isn't on the loans. You can't touch me, Amara. I have my own money. I have my trust fund and my charity work. I stopped looking at Genevieve. I slowly turned my head to look at Ashley. I let a small, predatory smile play on my lips. Ah, Ashley, I said softly. I was hoping you would bring that up. I reached into the folder again and pulled out a separate, thinner stack of papers. These were not legal contracts. They were spreadsheets, highlighting in yellow marked specific rows. You are right, Ashley. Your name isn't on the loan, but your name is all over the ledger for the Vance Family Foundation. Ashley went white. Her defiance evaporated instantly. I did a forensic audit of the family accounts last night, I said, locking eyes with her. It is amazing what you can find when you know where to look. You are the treasurer of the charity, right? The charity dedicated to feeding underprivileged children. Ashley took a step back, shaking her head. No. No, you can't. I found $600,000 in wire transfers over the last 2 years. I said, my voice rising slightly, cutting through her denial. Transfers to shell accounts that link directly to your personal credit card. You didn't buy those Hermes bags with your trust fund, Ashley. You bought them with money meant for starving kids. The room gasped. Genevieve turned to look at her daughter-in-law, horror dawning on her face. Even Desmond looked shocked. You stole from the foundation, Desmond whispered. Ashley, are you crazy? That is federal prison. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. Exactly, I said. Embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion. I looked at Ashley, who was now trembling, tears streaming down her face behind her sunglasses. So, Ashley, I said, you asked if I knew about your Hermes bags. I do. And I also know the phone number for the FBI Financial Crimes Division. In fact, Marcus is holding the line for me right now in the outer office. I picked up the phone receiver on the desk and held it out toward her. Do you want to say hello? Or should I tell them to come pick you up in the lobby? Genevieve Vance was cornered, but like a rat trapped in a kitchen, she was still trying to bite. She slammed her hand down on the mahogany table, her breathing ragged and shallow. She looked at the foreclosure notice I had slid toward her, then looked back at me with a mixture of terror and defiance. You cannot do this, Amara, she spat, her voice trembling. You can take the house. You can take the warehouse. But you cannot shut down the restaurants. Vance Bistro is an institution in this city. It is a cash cow. It generates $50,000 a week in revenue. If you foreclose on the business, you are killing a golden goose. No judge will allow you to seize a fully operational, profitable business just because of a missed payment deadline. We have cash flow. We can set up a payment plan. I sat back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. I watched her struggle. She was clinging to the belief that the restaurants were her safety net. She genuinely believed that as long as the doors were open and customers were eating, she still had power. You are right, Genevieve, I said calmly. Vance Bistro is a profitable machine. Or at least it was until 6 o'clock this morning. But a restaurant is not just a building with tables. A restaurant needs food. And as of today, you don't have any. Genevieve scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Please, that is just a hiccup. So one supplier dropped us. There are dozens of other vendors in Atlanta. We will have a new truck there by noon. You think you can starve us out? We are the Vances. People line up to do business with us. I checked my diamond watch. It was exactly 9:45. Actually, I said, looking at the heavy double doors of the boardroom. I think the person you need to speak to about that is arriving right now. Genevieve frowned. Who else is coming? I didn't answer. I just looked at Marcus, my assistant, and nodded. Marcus pressed a button on the wall panel, and the heavy doors slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss. The woman who walked in was not the woman who had sat at table 19. She was not the woman in the ill-fitting Macy's dress and the gray wig. She was a vision of power. My mother Viola stepped into the room wearing a cream-colored Armani pantsuit that fit her like a second skin. Her silver-streaked hair was braided into an intricate regal crown atop her head. She wore a single strand of South Sea pearls that I knew cost more than Genevieve's car. She didn't walk with the shuffle of a tired old woman. She glided across the floor with the stride of a CEO who owns the building. Desmond gasped audibly. Ashley lowered her sunglasses, her mouth falling open. Genevieve squinted, trying to reconcile the image of this elegant titan with the memory of the woman she had mocked. Who is that? Genevieve whispered. My mother stopped next to my chair. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity, then turned her gaze to the Vance family. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. She looked at them the way a lion looks at a gazelle that isn't even worth the effort of chasing. I believe we have met, Viola said, her voice rich and smooth, filling the acoustic space of the room. Although last time the lighting was quite poor and I was sitting by the kitchen door. Genevieve's eyes widened. Viola. My mother smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Mrs. Vance Viola said. It is a pleasure to finally speak to you face to face. I understand you are having some supply chain issues this morning. Genevieve looked from Viola to me, then back to Viola. I don't understand. What are you doing here? Did Amara buy you those clothes? Is this another part of the costume? I leaned forward. Genevieve, I said, my voice cutting through her confusion. You said you could just call another vendor. You said people line up to do business with you. I think it is time you knew exactly who feeds you. I gestured to my mother. May I introduce you to Ms. Viola Davis? She is the founder-owner and CEO of Viola's Greens. The silence that hit the room was physical. It felt like the air pressure had dropped. Viola's Greens. Desmond choked out. Our supplier, the exclusive organic distributor for the entire Southeast region? The same, Viola said coolly. Genevieve shook her head, her face draining of color. No, that is impossible. Viola's Greens is a massive corporation. You are just a what? Viola asked, raising an eyebrow. A mistake in address. A servant. Genevieve shrank back in her chair. For 20 years, Viola continued pacing slowly around the table like a predator circling prey. My trucks have delivered the tomatoes for your famous bisque. My farms have grown the lettuce for your $12 salads. My drivers have ensured that you look like a gourmet establishment. You built your reputation on the quality of my soil. She stopped directly behind Genevieve's chair. And for 20 years I stayed in the shadows because I believed in humility. But you, Genevieve, you believe in hierarchy. You believe that the person who serves the food is less human than the person who eats it. Viola reached into her designer bag and pulled out a document. It was a contract cancellation notice. This morning I invoked the morality clause in our supplier agreement, Viola stated. The clause clearly states that the vendor reserves the right to terminate service if the client engages in conduct that damages the vendor's reputation. Publicly abusing an elder, specifically the owner of the vending company, definitely qualifies. She dropped the paper in front of Genevieve. But I didn't stop there, Viola added. Genevieve looked up, tears of panic welling in her eyes. What more could you do? You already cut off the food. Viola laughed softly. You see, Genevieve, when Amara told me she was buying your debt, I decided to diversify my own portfolio. I made a few calls this morning to the landlord who owns the building where your flagship bistro is located. Desmond stood up. We have a lease, a 10-year lease. You had a lease, Viola corrected him. But your landlord was very eager to sell. Apparently you have been late on rent 3 times this year. He was happy to unload the property to a cash buyer who offered 20% over market value. Viola placed her palms on the table and leaned in, locking eyes with Genevieve. I bought the building, Genevieve. I bought the land. I own the bricks, the mortar, and the ground your restaurant stands on. She pulled out a second document. This one was taped with a bright orange eviction warning. As your new landlord, I am exercising my right to terminate the lease due to habitual late payments and insolvency. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Whatever equipment you leave behind will be auctioned off to pay for the cleaning fees. Genevieve made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her hands clawed at the edge of the table as if the floor was tilting beneath her. You own the building, Genevieve wheezed. I own the building, Viola confirmed, and I don't rent to people who call me a mistake. Genevieve looked at me. She looked at the foreclosure papers for her home. Then she looked at Viola, the woman she had banished to the kitchen, who now held the deed to her business. The weight of her own arrogance finally crushed her. Her eyes rolled back slightly and her knees gave way. She didn't faint, but she collapsed into the chair, sliding down until her chin hit the mahogany table. Mom Desmond screamed, rushing to her side. Genevieve lay there breathing heavily, staring blankly at the polished wood. She finally understood. She hadn't just insulted her daughter-in-law, she hadn't just insulted a guest. She had looked into the face of the woman who put food on her table and money in her pocket and she had spit on her. And now the hand that fed her had returned to slap her into oblivion. I watched them scramble to fan her face, Ashley crying in the corner, Desmond shouting for water. I looked at my mother and winked. "We are not done yet," I whispered. Ashley is still standing. Genevieve was still slumped over the mahogany table, gasping for air as the reality of her eviction settled in. Desmond was patting her back, looking at me with eyes that were no longer arrogant, just empty and terrified. They were broken. The Vance dynasty had been dismantled in less than 20 minutes. My mother Viola stood by the window watching the destruction, with the calm satisfaction of a general who had just won a war without firing a single shot. But there was one person in the room who still thought she could escape the blast radius. Ashley Vance stood near the door, clutching her Hermes Birkin bag like a shield. She was edging toward the exit, inching her way backward, while everyone was distracted by Genevieve's collapse. She looked like a rat trying to scurry off a sinking ship before the water hit the upper decks. She probably thought that because her last name was only Vance by marriage, she was immune to the debts of the company. She probably thought she could divorce her husband, take her trust fund, and disappear into the social circles of Savannah or Charleston. I watched her reach for the door handle. "Going somewhere, Ashley?" I asked. My voice was soft, but it stopped her dead in her tracks. She froze, her hand hovering over the brass lever. She turned slowly to face me, pushing her sunglasses up onto her head. Her eyes were wide, darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. I have to go," Ashley stammered. "This is a family matter. It has nothing to do with me. I need to pick up my dry cleaning." I picked up the phone receiver on the desk again. "Actually, Ashley, I think your dry cleaning can wait. There are some people in the lobby who are very eager to meet you." I pressed a button on the console. "Marcus, send them in." The heavy doors slid open again. But this time, it wasn't a business partner or a lawyer who walked through. Two men and a woman entered the room wearing navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. They didn't walk with the casual stride of corporate executives. They moved with the heavy, purposeful gait of law enforcement. Ashley let out a small, strangled squeak. "Gentlemen," I said, gesturing toward the blonde woman trembling by the door. "That is Ashley Vance." One of the officers stepped forward. He pulled a folded warrant from his pocket. "Ashley Vance," he announced, his voice flat and professional. "We are with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest!" Ashley shrieked. Her voice cracked, hitting a note so high it hurt my ears. "For what? I haven't done anything. This is a mistake. My father is a judge. You cannot touch me." The officer ignored her hysteria. He continued reading from the paper. "You are being charged with 6 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of filing false tax returns. We have evidence that over the last 24 months, you systematically diverted funds from the Vance Family Foundation, a registered 501c3 charity, into offshore accounts controlled by you." Ashley stumbled back, shaking her head violently. "No. That is a lie. That is Amara. She is setting me up. She is the one who hacked the accounts." I stood up and walked around the table. I held up the tablet I had been using. On the screen was a simple flow chart. It showed money leaving the charity account, money donated by good people to feed hungry children, and landing directly in a shell company called AV Consulting. And from there, the money went straight to American Express Saks Fifth Avenue and the dealership where she bought her Range Rover. "I didn't hack anything, Ashley," I said, holding the screen up for Genevieve and Desmond to see. "I just read the bank statements. You were lazy. You used the same IP address for the charity transfers that you used to upload your selfie on Instagram." Genevieve pulled herself up from the table. She looked at the screen. She saw the numbers. $600,000. Money that was supposed to be the family's legacy of giving. Money that was the only tax shelter they had left. You stole from the foundation," Genevieve whispered. Ashley turned to her mother-in-law, her eyes pleading. "Mom, please. You know I wouldn't." Amara faked this. Help me call the lawyers. And this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when the rats turned on each other. Genevieve looked at the police officers. She looked at the warrant. She looked at the ruin of her own life, the foreclosure, the eviction. She realized she was drowning. And like a drowning person, she would climb on top of anyone to get a breath of air, even her own daughter-in-law. Officer Genevieve said, her voice shaking, but gaining strength. We had no idea. What? Ashley gasped. Genevieve, we didn't know, Genevieve said louder, pointing a shaking finger at Ashley. She was the treasurer. She handled all the books for the charity. My son and I, we are victims here too. She betrayed us. She stole from us. Ashley's husband, Preston, who had been standing silently in the corner near the window, finally stepped forward. He was Desmond's younger brother, a weak man who had always let Ashley run his life. But seeing the handcuffs come out, self-preservation kicked in. She did it, Preston blurted out. I saw her with the ledgers late at night. She told me she was organizing donations. I didn't know she was stealing. Officer, I am innocent. I want to file a statement against her. Ashley looked at her husband, then at Genevieve, her face twisted into a mask of pure betrayal. You cowards, she screamed. You ate the dinners I paid for. You rode in the car I bought. You knew. You all knew the money was coming from somewhere. That is enough, the officer said. He grabbed Ashley's wrist. She tried to pull away, her fingernails clawing at the air. Don't touch me. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? Click. The sound of the handcuffs ratchet locking was the sweetest sound I had heard all morning. It cut through her screaming like a knife. The officer spun her around, securing her hands behind her back. The Hermes bag she loved so much fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Ashley Vance, the woman who had mocked my mother for her clothes, was now wearing the ultimate accessory of shame. She looked at me as the officers began to drag her toward the door. Her face was streaked with mascara. Her hair was a mess and the arrogance was completely gone. Amara, she wailed, please tell them to stop. I will apologize. I will do anything. I looked at her, then I looked down at my mother. Viola was watching the scene with a blank expression, sipping a glass of water Marcus had brought her. I walked over to Ashley. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the expensive perfume that she had bought with stolen money. You want to apologize? I asked. Yes. Yes. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I nodded slowly. Save it for the judge, Ashley. I hear the cafeteria food in federal prison is terrible. Maybe you will finally learn what it feels like to be hungry. The officers pushed her through the doors. Her screams echoed down the hallway, getting fainter and fainter, until the elevator doors dinged shut, silencing her. Get your hands off me. You are making a mistake. My family will destroy you. You are all cowards. The silence returned to the boardroom. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a graveyard. I turned back to the table. Genevieve and Desmond were staring at the door where Ashley had just been dragged out. They were alone. Their money was gone. Their business was gone. Their home was gone. And now their family was gone. They had thrown Ashley to the wolves to save themselves, but they didn't realize that they were still trapped in the den with the alpha. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down. I smoothed the lapel of my blue suit. Well, I said, looking at the shell-shocked survivors. Now that the criminal element has been removed, let's discuss your exit strategy. Because you still have 23 hours to get out of my building. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, silencing Ashley's screams as the officers dragged her away. The room fell into a stillness that felt heavier than the noise. I turned my chair slowly back to the table where Desmond and Genevieve remained. They were the survivors of the initial blast, but looking at them, I knew the fallout was going to be far worse than the explosion. Desmond was staring at the empty doorway, his face pale and slick with sweat. He slowly turned his gaze toward me, and for the first time in 5 years I saw him clearly. He wasn't a prince. He wasn't a partner. He was a frightened little boy in a suit he couldn't afford. Desmond slid out of his chair. He didn't stand up to fight. He sank down. He lowered himself onto the polished hardwood floor, disregarding the sharp crease in his trousers, and crawled on his knees toward me. He reached out his hands, trembling as they hovered near the hem of my skirt, afraid to touch me, but desperate to connect. "Amara, please," he choked out, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. "Baby, look at me. It is Desmond. We have been together for 5 years. 5 years of memories, 5 years of planning our future. You cannot just throw that away because of one bad weekend. I know I made a mistake. I know I should have defended your mother. I was weak. I was scared of my mom. But I love you. Doesn't that count for anything?" I looked down at him. I remembered the first date we went on, how charming he had been. I remembered the nights we spent talking about building a life together. But then I overlaid those memories with the photos of him in the hotel elevator with Chantel. I overlaid his pleading voice with the laughter I heard when his mother called mine a mistake. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the cold, clinical detachment of an auditor closing a bankrupt file. 5 years, I repeated softly. "You are right, Desmond. For 5 years I was blind. I thought your arrogance was confidence. I thought your control was protection. But I am not blind anymore. I have 20/20 vision, and all I see is a liability." I swiveled my chair toward Marcus. "Marcus, bring me the personnel file for the Director of Marketing at Vance Media Group." Marcus stepped forward and placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. I picked it up and read it aloud. "Desmond Vance, Title Director of Marketing, salary $250,000 a year." I looked back down at Desmond, who was wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I reviewed your work history last night, Desmond. In the last 3 years, you haven't launched a single campaign. You haven't signed a single new client. You have spent your days playing golf and your nights expensing dinners with women who are not your fiancée." "Amara, wait," he pleaded. "I bring value to the brand. I am the face of the company." "Not anymore," I said. "As the new owner of Vance Media, I am restructuring the executive team. We are cutting dead weight." I picked up a pen and signed the bottom of the paper with a sharp, decisive scratch. "You are fired, Desmond. Effective immediately. You will surrender your company car, your company phone, and your security badge to Marcus in the lobby. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items. You have 10 minutes. Desmond slumped back on his heels, his mouth hanging open. "Fired. But it is my family's company." "It was your family's company," I corrected. "Now it is my asset. And I don't hire people who fail to perform." I turned my attention to Genevieve. She was still sitting in her chair, staring at the foreclosure notice as if it were written in a foreign language. She looked aged, her skin gray and sagging without the buoyancy of her ego to hold it up. "And you, Genevieve," I said. "We need to discuss your living arrangements." She looked up, her eyes hollow. "You are taking the house." "I know. But surely you will give us time. We have 30 days by law." "Actually," I said, leaning forward, "the foreclosure is based on commercial collateral. The terms are different. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. However, because I am not a monster, and because I believe in housing the needy, I have arranged a new place for you." I slid a set of keys across the long table. They were simple silver keys with no keychain, looking cold and lonely on the dark wood. "I own a residential building in East Atlanta," I explained. "It is an older building, no elevator, thin walls. The neighborhood is vibrant. There is a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor that just became available. I have paid the rent for 3 months." Genevieve looked at the keys with horror. "East Atlanta. That is the slums. You expect me to live in a walk-up? I have bad knees. I am a Vance. You are a Vance with no credit score and no income," I reminded her. "And the irony, Genevieve, is that the apartment is very similar to the one you made fun of when you thought I lived there. It is amazing how the wheel turns. You spent your life looking down on people in those buildings. Now you will be looking up at them from the sidewalk." I stood up. The meeting was over. One last thing I said, gathering my files. I have decided what to do with the remaining assets of the Vance Media Group once I liquidate the equipment. Desmond looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Are you going to keep the money? No, I said, smiling at my mother, who was standing by the door, looking proud enough to burst. I am donating 100% of the liquidation proceeds to the Atlanta Women's Shelter, specifically to a fund that helps women escape financial abuse and domestic control. I looked at Desmond and Genevieve one last time. It seems fitting, doesn't it? The money you used to control people will now be used to set them free. Get out of my building. Marcus opened the door. Security guards were waiting. I didn't watch them leave. I turned my chair to face the window, looking out at the city of Atlanta. I heard the scuffle of feet, the soft sob of Genevieve, and the heavy silence of Desmond's defeat. Then the doors closed, and the air in the room felt instantly lighter. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive leather and absolute victory. My mother walked over and stood beside me. She didn't say a word. She just took my hand and squeezed it. We stood there, two queens looking over our kingdom, while the jesters were escorted out to the street where they belonged. 6 months is a long time in the business world, but it is an eternity when you are watching karma do its work. The seasons had changed in Atlanta, the humid summer giving way to a crisp golden autumn. But the biggest change wasn't in the weather, it was in the landscape of our lives. I parked my car in front of the new Viola's Greens headquarters. It was a massive solar-powered facility that we had built with the profits from the Apex restructuring. Tonight was the grand opening, and the party was already in full swing. But before I went in, I checked my phone. I had a Google alert set up for the name Vance, a little guilty pleasure I allowed myself once a week. The update on Ashley Vance had come through that morning. Her trial date had been set. Her lawyers were trying to plead insanity, claiming the pressure of being a socialite had forced her to steal. The judge wasn't buying it. She was facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The photos of her leaving the courthouse looking gaunt and wearing a department store suit were a stark contrast to the girl who had sneered at my mother in the St. Regis. Then there was Desmond. I scrolled down. His LinkedIn profile had been updated. He was now a junior sales associate for a budget car insurance company in Macon, 2 hours away from the city. Rumor had it he was cold calling people during dinner time, trying to sell them liability coverage. I imagined him reciting a script, getting hung up on, and remembering the days when he thought he owned the world. And Genevieve. I didn't need a Google alert for her. My assistant Marcus had gone to get his teeth cleaned last week and saw her. She was working the front desk at a dental office in the suburbs. Apparently, she had been reprimanded twice for being rude to patients. She was spending her days filing charts and answering phones, forced to smile at strangers who treated her like the help. She was living the life she had mocked, serving others to survive. I locked my phone and stepped out of the car. The evening air was filled with the sound of jazz music and laughter. Real laughter. I walked into the garden of the new headquarters. It was beautiful. String lights twinkled in the oak trees. Tables were piled high with fresh organic food, the bounty of my mother's hard work. There were no politicians here looking for favors. There were no social climbers looking for a photo op. The guests were farmers, chefs, teachers, and friends who had stood by us when we had nothing. Amara. I turned to see my mother holding 2 glasses of champagne. She looked radiant. She was wearing a vibrant blue dress, her hair loose and natural, her face glowing with a happiness that no amount of money could buy. She handed me a glass. To the new building, she said, clinking her glass against mine. To the new building, I replied. And to the old baggage we left behind. We walked through the crowd, stopping to hug people we actually loved. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Mrs. Higgins, my old neighbor from the Decoy apartment complex. She was wearing her Sunday best and eating a plate of ribs. "Baby girl," she said, pulling me into a bone-crushing hug. "I saw the news about your ex-husband's family. Serve them right. God don't like ugly. And he sure ain't fond of arrogant." I laughed, hugging her back. You are right, Mrs. Higgins. Later that night, as the band slowed down and the stars came out, my mother tapped a spoon against her glass. The crowd hushed naturally, not out of fear, but out of respect. I want to make a toast, Viola said, looking at me with tears in her eyes. 6 months ago, my daughter stood up in a room full of people and saved my dignity. She canceled a wedding to save her soul. And she taught me that silence is not always a virtue. Sometimes you have to roar. She raised her glass high. They called her a mistake. They called me a mistake. But looking around tonight at this business we built, at this family we chose, I think we are the best mistake that ever happened to this city. I stepped forward, taking the microphone. I looked at the sea of warm, supportive faces. I thought about the white Vera Wang dress hanging in the back of my closet, still wrapped in plastic. Thank you, Mom, I said. And I want to say one thing about that day. I used to regret buying that expensive wedding dress. I used to think it was a waste of money. But I realized something. That dress wasn't a waste. It was a filter. It filtered out the lies. It filtered out the fake love. And it filtered out the people who didn't deserve a seat at our table. I raised my glass. So here is to the mistakes in dresses. May they always be expensive, may they always be bold, and may they always know when to walk away. Cheers, the crowd roared. I took a sip of champagne. It tasted like freedom. I put my arm around my mother, and we stood there laughing under the Atlanta stars. The Vance family had wanted to watch a show. Well, they missed the best part. The finale wasn't a tragedy, it was a triumph. And the best revenge wasn't destroying them. It was living a life so full, so rich, and so authentic that we forgot they even existed. This story reminds us that true wealth is never defined by designer labels or zip codes, but by the integrity we carry when no one is watching. The Vance family proved that you can be draped in diamonds, yet remain morally bankrupt. Amara's wedding dress wasn't a wasted expense. It was a necessary filter that strained out the toxic people who only loved her facade, not her soul. Never apologize for cutting ties with those who disrespect your roots. Your dignity is the only asset that never depreciates, and standing up for yourself is the ultimate luxury. Have you ever had to choose your dignity over a relationship? I would love to hear your story in the comments below.